Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something really core to AI. Actual reasoning. Large language models, they're amazing, right? But ask them to plan and execute something complex, step by step, and, well, they often stumble. But what if there's a different way? A new model, inspired by how our brains work. That's what we're exploring today. The Hierarchical Reasoning Model, or HRM. Picture this. Solving super tough Sudoku puzzles, finding the best path in massive mazes, even tackling those tricky ARC-AGI reasoning challenges. Now imagine doing all that with a model that's, tiny compared to the giants, only 27 million parameters, and trained on just 1,000 examples. Seriously. This thing achieves incredible results where current LLMs, even with their fancy chain of thought prompting, often fail completely. So our mission today is to unpack this HRM. How does this brain-inspired design work? Why can it reason so well with so little? And could it really be a whole new path for AI? Okay, so let's start right there. Why do these huge LLMs struggle with complex reasoning? They're called deep learning models, but it sounds like maybe they're not deep in the right way.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's counterintuitive, absolutely. The issue is what we call their effective computational depth. Despite having billions of parameters, tons of layers, the core architecture, especially in standard transformers, fundamentally limits their ability to perform, let's say, sustained, complex algorithmic reasoning. They're fantastic at pattern matchers, brilliant at predicting the next word based on probability, but they aren't really built for, say, polynomial time computation or acting like a truly Turing-complete system needed for deep symbolic logic.
So it's like having a massive encyclopedia, tons of information, lots of pages, but it doesn't necessarily have the structure to write a complex, evolving novel on its own. You can't just stack pages higher and expect deeper thought.
That's a really good analogy, exactly. The underlying narrative structure, the reasoning engine, isn't getting deeper in the same way, and that's why you see this heavy reliance on things like chain of thought prompting, COT.
Ah, right, where you basically ask the model to talk itself through the problem step by step.
Precisely. COT kind of externalizes the reasoning. It forces the model to map its thinking process onto language tokens, these intermediate steps.
Okay, I can immediately see the downside there. It feels fragile. Like if you're talking yourself through building IKEA furniture and you miss one word in the instructions.
Exactly. The whole thing can just unravel. A single misstep, maybe getting the order wrong, and the reasoning breaks down.
And I bet it's super slow and needs tons of data to learn all those step-by-step examples for complex stuff.
You got it. It's brittle, it's data hungry, and it's computationally intensive, especially for deep reasoning chains. So this paper argues for something different. Latent reasoning.
Latent reasoning, meaning the thinking happens inside the model.
Yeah.
Not spelled out in words.
Yes, exactly. The complex computation happens within the model's internal hidden states. More like how our brains seem to work, right? We don't constantly narrate every single micro-calculation when we solve a problem.
That makes intuitive sense. Our internal monologue isn't that detailed, but haven't people tried to get neural nets to do that kind of deep internal reasoning before? And wasn't it really hard?
Oh, absolutely. Historically, it's been a huge challenge. You run into things like vanishing gradients in very deep networks, making them hard to train.
Right.
Or with traditional recurrent networks, you have the memory bottleneck of backpropagation through time, BPTT, where you have to store everything.
Okay.
And then there's the issue of premature convergence in RNNs. They often just settle too quickly into a stable state and stop computing effectively, limiting that depth we need.
So lots of roadblocks with the standard approaches. Which brings us back to HRM. If the usual AI methods hit a wall, where did the inspiration for HRM come from? You mentioned the brain.
Yeah, the human brain turns out to be a pretty compelling blueprint. It's naturally organized for deep, multi-stage reasoning through its hierarchical structure and how different parts operate on different timescales.
Different timescales. Is this like the thinking fast and slow idea, system 1 and system 2?
Very much related, yes. The paper points to 3 key principles drawn from neuroscience. First is hierarchical processing. You have higher-level brain areas, like parts of the cortex, integrating information over longer periods for abstract planning and goals. Then you have lower-level areas handling the rapid, detailed execution.
Oh, yeah, like a general planning troop movements versus the soldier reacting instantly on the ground. Makes sense.
That's a good way to think about it. Second, there's temporal separation. It's not just a conceptual hierarchy. These brain levels actually operate at different speeds, different intrinsic timescales. We see this reflected in brain waves, like slower theta rhythms potentially guiding high-level stuff, and faster gamma rhythms involved in the quick, detailed computations.
Wow, that's a direct link. So different speeds for different kinds of thinking, What's the third principle? How does the brain keep refining things? Feedback.
Absolutely. The third principle is recurrent connectivity. The brain is full of feedback loops. Information flows up, but also back down. This allows for constant iterative refinement. And crucially, it achieves this computational depth without the massive credit assignment cost you get with traditional BPTT and AI, which has always made training really deep recurrent models difficult. It's like built-in self-correction.
Okay, this brain-inspired approach sounds way more organic. So how did the researchers translate these ideas, hierarchy, timescales, recurrence, into the actual HRM architecture? What does it look like under the hood?
So HRM has this novel recurrent setup with two main parts, two interdependent modules. And there's a high-level module, let's call it H, for the slow, abstract planning, the deliberate reasoning part.
The strategic planner.
And then there's a low-level module, L, which handles the fast, detailed computations, the tactical execution.
So a direct mapping of those brain levels we talked about. How do H and L interact to get that deep reasoning without just stopping too early like those older RNNs?
That's the clever part they call hierarchical convergence.
Okay.
Here's how it works. The L module, which is an RNN itself, runs for a bit and converges to a local stable state. It basically completes a specific subcomputation.
Right.
Then the H module takes the result of that finish L module phase and updates its own internal state, its high-level plan.
Ah, okay.
And here's the key. After H updates, it essentially resets the L module with this new context, this new high-level guidance. So L starts a fresh computational phase, working on the next subproblem based on the updated plan from H.
Interesting. So H is like a supervisor,
Yeah.
setting a goal for L, letting L work it out, getting a result, updating the overall plan, and then giving L a new task.
Exactly. It creates this sequence of distinct, stable, nested computations. You get phase after phase of L computing, guided by H. This dramatically increases the effective computational depth of the whole system.
Like breaking a huge problem down into manageable chunks, solving each chunk, and using that solution to figure out the next chunk.
Precisely. And the amazing part is, this whole sequential reasoning process, solving the tasks step by step internally, happens in a single forward pass of the model. No need for humans to predefine intermediate steps or goals.
Wow, okay, no explicit intermediate supervision. That bypasses the whole brittleness issue of chain of thought we discussed. But training these kinds of complex interacting recurrent systems must be tricky, right? How do they make it stable and efficient?
Yeah, training is often the Achilles heel. HRM uses some really smart innovations here. First, there's something called one-step gradient approximation. Remember how we said backpropagation through time, BPTT, is memory hungry because you have to store all the hidden states for the whole sequence?
Yeah, it scales terribly with longer sequences, right?
Yeah.
And not very brain-like.
Exactly. So HRM leverages an idea related to deep equilibrium models. If the recurrent modules, like L and H, converge to a fixed point, a stable state, you can actually approximate the gradient needed for learning much more efficiently. You basically only need the gradient information from the final state of each module's convergence phase. This gives you an almost constant memory footprint, like O1 memory, no matter how many internal steps L takes.
Okay, wait, so instead of remembering the entire history of the computation, you just need the end result of each phase?
Essentially, yes, for calculating the update. It dramatically cuts down memory use in compute, making it scalable and arguably more biologically plausible than unrolling everything through time.
It sounds like a massive win for efficiency. What else?
Next up is deep supervision. This one's also kind of brain-inspired, maybe mimicking how brain rhythms might help regulate learning over time. In HRM, they break the training computation into multiple forward passes. They call them segments. After each segment, they calculate a loss and update the model's parameters.
So more frequent updates than just one big update at the very end.
Right. But crucially, when they move from one segment to the next, they detach the hidden state. This means the gradients don't flow all the way back through the entire history of segments.
Ah, so it breaks the long dependency chain.
Exactly. It gives the high-level module more frequent feedback or learning signals, and it acts as a strong regularizer, improving stability, which is really important for these kinds of equilibrium-based models.
Okay, frequent localized updates, got it. And the last one was adaptive computational time, ACT. This sounds like the model deciding how hard to think.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
ACT is very much about that System 1, System 2 idea. The model learns to adapt its own runtime based on how hard the task seems. They use a queue learning-like mechanism. There's a small queue head attached to the high-level module, H. Based on H's state, This cue head predicts an action, either continue computing, run another segment, or halt, stop and give the final answer.
So the model literally learns, this looks tricky, I need a few more rounds of thinking. Or, okay, this is easy, I'm done.
That's the core idea. It dynamically decides how many computational segments it needs. The benefits are huge. You save a lot of computation on easier tasks or instances. Plus, it gives you amazing inference time scaling. A model trained with, say, a maximum of 10 segments can often generalize and perform even better if you give it more time, like 20 segments, during testing, especially for really hard problems like Sudoku, and you don't need to retrain it.
That's powerful. Being able to trade off compute time for better accuracy at inference without retraining. But isn't Q-learning sometimes notoriously unstable to train?
It can be, yes. The paper mentions they mitigate this using architectural choices like post-norm layers, RMS norm, and the Atom W optimizer, which help keep the parameters well-behaved and ensure the Q-learning part converges reliably.
Okay, so this combination, the one-step gradient, the deep supervision, the adaptive time, it all paints a picture of a system designed for efficient, stable, deep reasoning, which leads us to the results. How did HRM actually perform on those tough benchmarks? You mentioned Sudoku, mazes, ARC.
Yeah.
Especially given it was trained on so little data.
The results are genuinely striking. Remember, these HRM models started from random weights, no pre-training like LLMs get, just standard sequence-to-sequence training with input-output pairs. And yes, the kicker is the data efficiency, only about 1,000 training examples per task.
1,000 examples. That's basically nothing in modern AI terms. Okay, lay it on me. How did it do on Sudoku Extreme 9x9?
Near perfect accuracy, like almost 100%. And this wasn't just any Sudoku dataset. They emphasize it's much harder than typical benchmarks. It requires an average of 22 backtracking steps to solve, whereas easy ones might need less than one.
22 backtracks. Okay, that's definitely tough. And how did the standard approaches like COTE with big LLMs do on this exact same hard data set?
They completely failed. 0% accuracy.
0. Wow. Okay, that's stark. Near perfect for HRM, 0 for state-of-the-art COTE. That really drives home the point about different kinds of reasoning capabilities.
It really does. And it's a similar story for maze hard, 30 by 30, finding the single optimal path in large complex mazes, HRM, again, near perfect accuracy.
And the comparison.
The paper cites results where large vanilla transformers, even with 175 million parameters and trained on 1 million examples, couldn't crack 20% accuracy on similar hard maze tasks.
So again, smaller model, way less data, vastly better performance on a task requiring planning and search. Incredible. What about the ARC AGI challenge? That's seen as a big test for more general intelligence, right? Inductive reasoning.
Exactly. ARC is tough because you have to look at a few examples of input-output grid transformations and figure out the underlying rule or pattern, then apply it to a new input. It requires abstract reasoning. HRM, the 27M parameter version on a 30 by 30 grid, achieved 40.3% accuracy.
Okay, 40.3%. How does that stack up?
It substantially beats leading COTE-based models mentioned in the paper, like one called O3 Mini Highs at 34.5%, and even results reported for models like Claude 3.7, which apparently scored around 21.2%. And remember, those are generally much, much larger models.
So across the board, logical deduction, pathfinding, inductive reasoning HRM seems to be punching way above its weight, suggesting its architecture is genuinely better suited for these kinds of tasks than just scaling up standard models. Which makes me wonder, can we actually see how it's solving these problems? Can we peek inside its thought process? Does it use the same strategy for everything?
That's another fascinating part of the study. They did visualize the intermediate predictions the model makes during its computation, segment by segment. And what's cool is it seems to adapt its strategy based on the task.
Oh, really? So it's not just one fixed algorithm, it changes its approach.
It appears so. For the maze task, the visualizations suggest HRM kind of explores multiple potential paths concurrently in its internal state. Then it seems to prune away the dead ends or inefficient routes, builds up a rough outline of the solution path, and then iteratively refines it.
Huh. Like someone mentally mapping out routes and backtracking. Okay, what about Sudoku? That's more logic and constraints.
For Sudoku, the intermediate steps look much more like a depth-first search. The model seems to make tentative assignments, explore consequences, and if it hits a contradiction, it backtracks just like a person would systematically work through a hard Sudoku puzzle.
And for the ARC tasks, that's about finding abstract rules.
With ARC, the process looks different again. It seems to make more incremental changes to the grid, step by step, progressively improving the state towards the target output. It's less about deep backtracking like Sudoku and more like a gradual refinement or optimization process.
Wow. So the same underlying architecture is deploying different high-level reasoning strategies, path exploration, depth-first search, incremental refinement depending on the problem, without being explicitly told to.
That's what it looks like. This emergent strategic flexibility is really compelling. It's choosing the right tool for the job, so to speak.
That feels much closer to actual intelligence, adapting the approach to the problem. Very cool. Now, you also mentioned something about a direct brain correspondence showing up in how HRM organizes itself internally, this dimensionality hierarchy thing.
Yes, this is potentially one of the most profound findings. There's a key idea from neuroscience that the complexity and flexibility of a brain region correlates with the dimensionality of the patterns of neural activity it can support. Higher order areas, like the prefrontal cortex involved in complex thought, tend to show higher dimensional activity patterns, allowing them to represent more complex states. This is often measured using something called the participation ratio, or PR.
Okay, so higher dimension means more capacity for complex representation and processing, like having more variables to work with.
Kind of, yeah. A richer representational space. And what's amazing is that HRM spontaneously reproduces this principle after training. They measured the PR of the internal states of the low-level L module and the high-level H module. The L module state ended up occupying a relatively low-dimensional subspace. Its PR was around 30. But the H module, the planner, operated in a much higher dimensional space. Its PR was almost 90.
Whoa, that's a big difference. Nearly 3 times higher for the high-level module.
Yeah.
And you're saying they didn't build this difference in explicitly, it just happened during training.
Exactly. It's an emergent property. They checked this. An untrained HRM network with the same architecture but random weights showed no such separation. Both H and L had low, similar PR values. The hierarchy and dimensionality developed purely as a result of learning to solve the tasks.
That's wild. And the ratio between them, like H being about 3 times the dimensionality of L, does that match anything in biology?
Remarkably, yes. Their measured ratio of about 2.98 is very close to the ratio observed between higher and lower cortical areas in the mouse brain, which is around 2.25.
Wow.
This is significant because many standard deep learning models suffer from something called neural collapse, where representations tend to become less dimensional during training. HRM seems to avoid this, fostering these high-dimensional representations in the planning module, which is thought to be crucial for cognitive flexibility.
So it might have autonomously discovered a fundamental organizational principle for intelligence that mirrors the brain.
It certainly looks that way. It's not just solving the problems, it's organizing itself internally in a way that resembles biological intelligence. That's really exciting.
Absolutely. So pulling this all together, what are the bigger implications here? For AI researchers, engineers listening, where does HRM point us?
Well, first, it takes a step towards practical Turing completeness. While we've known theoretically that some recurrent networks can be universal computers, practical limitations like training difficulty, memory cost, BPTT, and convergence issues held them back. HRM, by tackling those specific problems with its architecture and training methods, demonstrates it can actually be trained to perform these complex, multi-step reasoning tasks, requiring things like extensive search and backtracking tasks that really push the limits of standard transformers.
So it makes that theoretical power much more achievable in practice. That's a big step.
Definitely. It also offers a strong contrast to methods trying to combine reinforcement learning with chain of thought. RL can sometimes guide SOT, but it's often sample inefficient, unstable, and relies on sparse rewards. HRM uses dense, gradient-based learning signals in its internal continuous space, which is generally much more efficient and stable and perhaps more brain-like than trial and error RL.
Yeah, it feels like it's learning the reasoning process more directly. This whole approach really challenges the dominant paradigm in AI right now, doesn't it? The focus on just scaling up non-hierarchical models like transformers.
It absolutely does. For a long time, the mantra has largely been bigger is better, just scale up the parameters and data. HRM's success, especially its data efficiency and performance on reasoning tasks, strongly suggests that architecture matters. It presents a compelling case that hierarchical, multi-timescale, recurrent architectures like this are a viable, maybe even superior, alternative for building systems capable of genuine, flexible reasoning, moving beyond just pattern matching.
Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive. We've looked at the Hierarchical Reasoning Model, HRM. It's this fascinating brain-inspired architecture using a high-level planner and a low-level executor working together at different speeds. This structure, combined with clever training techniques, gives it incredible computational depth. It lets HRM solve really hard reasoning problems. Sudoku, mazes, ARC-AGI that often stump much bigger LLMs using chain of thought. And it does this with remarkable stability and, maybe most impressively, using tiny amounts of training data compared to the norm.
Right, and I think for anyone working in AI or just watching the field, HRM is really food for thought. It suggests that maybe brute force scaling isn't the only answer, or even the best one, for cracking true reasoning. This idea of building in more structure, inspired by the brain's own hierarchy and temporal dynamics, could be a really fruitful direction for developing more capable and efficient AI.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to chew on. Could this kind of brain-inspired design, this elegant separation of thinking fast and slow within the model, coupled with its emergent internal organization, could this be closer to a foundational blueprint for artificial general intelligence? Or is it just one really important piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle we still need to assemble?